"Look at this old guy. Bet he's never done anything worth a dime." The young man sneered, his voice dripping with mockery as his friends laughed beside him. The man they targeted didn't respond. He was too weary to fight back. A group of teens thought they were just having fun at a gas station in a small Georgia town, until a group of Marines showed up, and everything changed. Who was this man? What brought the Marines there? What's the most unexpected act of kindness you've seen turn a moment around? Let's find out. Welcome to True Quiet Stories. Let's uncover what happened in this story. If you love these stories, you can support the channel by liking and subscribing. In a small Georgia town, the air smells of gasoline and pine. Ethan Brooks laughed there. He was 19 years old. He hung out with his friends, a tight-knit group of teens who roamed the streets of Pineview, a quiet town where the hum of cicadas often drowned out the sound of passing cars. Ethan's days were carefree. He cracked jokes, pulled pranks, and chased thrills, his hands quick from years of mischief. He smirked at strangers, even when his antics crossed lines, even when his words stung, even when the weight of his own recklessness felt too heavy to bear. His messy brown hair was always hidden under a baseball cap, his sneakers scuffed from running around, his eyes bright but careless, a carelessness that came from a heart that had known privilege, that had known boredom, that had known arrogance, a heart that took more than it gave, even when the town demanded more, even when the streets whispered humility, even when the days seemed to take more than they offered. Ethan lived with his parents in a modest house on Cedar Lane, a cluttered space with a gaming console, a fridge full of soda, and a window that overlooked the town's main drag, the distant rumble of trucks, a constant reminder of the things he couldn't escape, of the things he couldn't change, of the things he couldn't feel. His older sister, who'd once been his moral compass, had moved to Atlanta 2 years ago for college, leaving Ethan to navigate his teenage years alone, to chase his thrills alone, to hold on to his bravado alone, even in the silence, even in the dusk, even in the years that had passed since she left. Ethan kept going. He played hard, but he had a careless heart. He mocked more than he listened. It was all he knew. Ethan's life in Pineview, Georgia, was a daily sprint through youth and the past. The town had seen better days, its streets lined with faded signs, its businesses struggling through economic shifts, its people worn by years of hard work, years of dreams deferred, years of a life that seemed to take more than it gave. Pineview was a small community, just over 2,500 people, a place where everyone knew everyone, where the local gas station on Main Street had been a fixture for decades, a spot where locals filled their tanks, shared gossip, and found a moment of connection, a place that Ethan's grandfather had worked at as a mechanic, that Ethan and his friends had claimed as their hangout, that Ethan fought to keep exciting, even when the odds were against him, even when the days grew dull, even when the town seemed to forget the station, to forget his family, to forget him. He grew up in Pineview in a small house on Oak Street where his parents had raised him with leniency, with indulgence, with the belief that youth was the greatest gift you could have, that fun was the greatest thing you could chase, that confidence was the greatest thing you could hold, even when the world was harsh, even when the nights were long, even when the lessons were heavy. His father, Mark, had been a factory worker, his hands rough as he operated machines, his voice loud as he cheered at Ethan's games, his pride a bright spot in their small home, a pride that Ethan still felt even now, years after the factory closed, years after Mark took a desk job, years after the mischief became his outlet, his joy, his life. His mother, Linda, had been a cashier, her smile a comfort to every customer, her hands quick as she rang up sales, her faith a steady anchor for their family, her prayers a nightly ritual that Ethan still remembered, even now years after we retired, years after the mischief became his identity, his memory, his purpose. They didn't have much money, their meals simple but hearty, meatloaf on Sundays, burgers on weekdays, A rare treat of ice cream when the budget allowed. But they had each other, and that made their small house a haven, a place where Ethan always felt free, always felt supported, always felt untouchable. Those memories were all Ethan had left after his sister left. A quiet departure that came after she'd grown tired of his antics, her laughter silenced, her guidance gone. A void he couldn't fill. They'd been close once, partners in every childhood adventure, allies through every storm, and her move to Atlanta on that humid summer day shifted the dynamic they'd built, leaving Ethan with nothing but his friends, the house, the freedom that filled his days, his nights, his heart. He'd been 17 then, his hands still quick, his bravado still firm, but his world forever changed, his heart heavy with rebellion, with solitude, with a life that seemed to demand more than he could, give more than he could bear, more than he could hold. He threw himself into his mischief, running from morning to evening, his hands quick as he planned pranks, his voice loud as he taunted strangers, his heart heavy with the weight of boredom, with the weight of youth, with the weight of a town. That was all was watching, a town that hadn't seen his better side in years, a town that reminded him of everything he'd lost, everything he couldn't afford, everything he couldn't feel, even in the silence, even in the dusk, even in the years that had kept him apart. But Ethan had a careless heart, a heart that still beat with the lessons his parents taught him, with the freedom they'd instilled, with the arrogance he held above all else, a carelessness that lived on in the taunts he threw, even now, even here, even in the streets where no one saw him, where no one cared, where no one knew. He played with abandon, taking pride in the chaos he caused, making sure every prank was bold, every laugh was loud, every moment was his, a reckless standard for the friends who filled his days, even if they never understood, even if they never thanked him, even if they never saw the effort he put in, the thrill he poured into every stunt, the carelessness he gave to every word. The Pineview gas station buzzed with the hum of late afternoon activity that warm June day, the air thick with the scent of gasoline and the chatter of locals pulling in to fill their tanks. The sun dipped low on the horizon, casting a golden glow over the cracked pavement, the station's faded sign swaying gently in the breeze, a relic of a time when the town had thrived. Ethan Brooks leaned against the side of his friend's beat-up pickup truck, his baseball cap tilted back, his hands shoved into the pockets of his jeans, a smirk playing on his lips as he scanned the lot for something to amuse himself. His friends, a group of 4 teens just as restless as he was, lounged nearby, their laughter loud and careless, their voices carrying over the sound of a car engine starting up. Ethan adjusted his cap, his eyes narrowing as he spotted a figure standing near the edge of the lot, a man whose presence seemed to spark his interest, a man whose stillness seemed to challenge his sense of fun, a man whose existence seemed to invite his mockery, even in the sunlight, even in the crowd, even in the moments that passed him by. He nudged his friend Jake, his voice sharp as he sneered, his words dripping with disdain, his heart racing with the thrill of a new target, a thrill he understood, a thrill he felt, a thrill he couldn't ignore. He didn't know the man's name, didn't know his story, didn't know the weight he carried, but he knew the look of someone who didn't fit, the chance for a laugh, the need for a distraction, even if it meant cruelty, even if it meant hurt, even if it meant overlooking the man's quiet dignity. The man's name was Samuel Hayes, though Ethan didn't care to ask, didn't know the story behind those tired eyes, didn't know the weight he carried, the weight of a war that had taken everything, the weight of a life that had left him with nothing, the weight of a silence that had become his only companion, his only comfort, his only truth. Samuel was 70 years old, a homeless veteran who'd been scraping by on the streets of Pineview for years, a man who'd served as a sergeant in the U.S. Marine Corps, who'd fought in Vietnam in 1968, who'd seen things he couldn't unsee, who had done things he couldn't undo, who'd lost things he couldn't reclaim. He'd been a hero once, a man who'd led his squad through a deadly ambush in the jungles of Khe Sanh, holding off enemy forces to secure a medevac for his wounded brothers, his own body scarred by a bullet, his own heart scarred by the screams of the men he couldn't save, by the faces of the friends he'd lost, by the guilt that had followed him home, that had followed him through the years, that had followed him to the gas station where he now stood, where he now trembled, where he now survived on the edges of a town that had forgotten him, on the edges of a world that had moved on without him, on the edges of a life that had left him, with nothing but the clothes on his back, a tattered dog tag around his neck, the memories in his mind, the silence in his heart. Samuel had lost everything after the war, his family, his home, his health, his very sense of self. The war a thief that had taken more than he could ever hope to reclaim. He'd come home to Pineview in 1970, a different man than the one who'd left, his body weakened by injuries, his smile gone, his heart heavier with the things he'd seen, the things he'd done, the things he couldn't undo. His wife, Ellen, had tried to help, her gentle hands a comfort, her soft voice a lifeline, her love a beacon in the darkness that had consumed him, that had changed him, that had broken him in ways she couldn't fix, in ways he couldn't share, in ways they couldn't survive. But the nightmares were too much, the flashbacks too real, the guilt too heavy, the PTSD too strong, a force that pulled him under, that pulled him away, that pulled him apart, until Ellen couldn't hold on anymore, until she passed away from a sudden stroke in 1985, leaving Samuel alone with their son, David, a son who grew up and moved to Savannah, seeking a life far from the shadow of a father who couldn't find his way back, who couldn't find his peace, who couldn't find his home. Samuel didn't blame him, didn't fight him, didn't beg him to stay, knowing he was right, knowing he was broken, knowing he couldn't be the father David deserved, the man he'd once been, the man he'd never be again. Samuel had been, standing at the edge of the gas station lot that day, a small tin can in his hand, a plea for spare change to buy a meal, a can that held the hope of a bite, a can that held the weight of his hunger, a can that held the shame of his fall, even in the silence, even in the heat, even in the years that had kept him apart. He lived in a makeshift shelter behind the town's old mill, a crumbling structure with a tarp for a roof, a tattered blanket his only warmth, a cracked flashlight his only light, a small tin box his only possession, a box that held the things that mattered most to him, the things that kept him going, the things that reminded him of the man he'd been, even if he couldn't feel it anymore, even if he couldn't find it anymore, even if he couldn't live it anymore. Inside the box was a faded photo of Ellen and David, taken on David's 6th birthday, their smiles bright against a sunny park backdrop, a moment of joy frozen in time, a moment Samuel held on to, a moment that broke his heart, that kept him alive, that kept him hoping, even if he didn't know why, even if he didn't know how, even if he didn't know what for. There was also a letter Ellen wrote him during the war. The paper yellowed, the ink faded, but the words still legible, words of love and hope that had kept him going through the darkest nights, words he read when the loneliness felt too heavy to bear. And there was his Purple Heart, a medal he'd been awarded for his bravery in Vietnam, a medal he'd buried in the box, a medal he couldn't look at, a medal that felt like a mockery of the pain he carried, of the lives he couldn't save, of the man he'd once been, a man he'd lost, a man he'd never be again. Samuel didn't fight back that day, didn't respond, didn't let Ethan see the depth of his hurt, even though he had no strength to argue, even though their taunts cut deeper than they could know, even though his voice was too weak to protest, a weakness he understood, a weakness he felt, a weakness he couldn't hide. He stood there, his hands trembling as he held the tin can, his eyes downcast with shame, his heart heavy with the weight of loss, with the weight of survival, with the weight of a life that had been reduced to this, even if he didn't expect kindness even if he didn't believe he deserved it, even if he didn't know what would come of it. The Pineview gas station glowed under the fading light of that warm June evening, the golden hue of the setting sun casting long shadows across the cracked pavement, where the air still carried the sting of gasoline and the echoes of laughter, turned cruel. Samuel Hayes stood at the edge of the lot, his frail body hunched under the weight of Ethan Brooks's taunts, his hands trembling as he clutched the small tin can, his eyes fixed on the ground, as if the pavement could shield him from the shame that burned deeper than the summer heat. Ethan and his friend stood a few feet away, their laughter sharp and unyielding, their voices a chorus of mockery that cut through the stillness of the evening, their smirks wide with the thrill of their own arrogance, an arrogance they understood, an arrogance they felt, an arrogance they couldn't ignore. Ethan tossed a pebble at Samuel's feet, his words dripping with disdain as he egged his friends on, his heart racing with the rush of power, a power he craved, a power he wielded, a power that blinded him to the man before him, even in the sunlight, even in the crowd, even in the moments that passed him by. Samuel didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't let Ethan see the depth of his hurt, even though the taunts tore at wounds far older than the boys could imagine, even though his body ached with the weight of years on the street, even though his voice was too weak to protest, a weakness he understood, a weakness he felt, a weakness he couldn't hide. He stood there, a broken man, his heart heavy with the weight of loss, with the weight of survival, with the weight of a life that had been reduced to this, even if he didn't expect kindness, even if he didn't believe he deserved it, even if he didn't know what would come of it. But Samuel's story hadn't gone unseen, not by everyone, not by those who saw beyond the tattered clothes and the tin can, not by those who knew the weight of a past unspoken, the power of a heroism. Unseen, the value of a man who'd given everything and asked for nothing in return. Inside the gas station, behind the counter, cluttered with candy bars and lottery tickets, stood a man who'd been watching the scene unfold with growing anger, a man who'd seen more than most, a man whose own life had been shaped by the kind of sacrifice Samuel embodied, a man whose heart stirred with a recognition that went deeper than the small-town lot could ever hold. His name was Robert Klein, a 62-year-old cashier and a retired Marine, a man who'd served in Vietnam alongside men like Samuel, who'd known heroes who'd faded into the shadows, who'd carried the same guilt, the same pain, the same silence that Samuel bore, a silence Robert recognized, a silence he understood, a silence he couldn't ignore. Robert had been working the evening shift that day, his hands steady as he rang up customers, his eyes catching the quiet man at the edge of the lot, the way Samuel's hands trembled as he stood, the way his dog tag glinted under the setting. Sun, the way the moment held a weight Robert couldn't ignore, a weight that spoke of honor, of sacrifice, of a hero forgotten, even in the sunlight, even in the lot, even in the years that had kept him apart. He'd stepped out from behind the counter when Ethan's taunts grew louder, his voice steady but firm as he shouted for them to stop, his presence a force that cut through the laughter, a force that drew every eye, a force that changed the air itself, even in the gas station, even in the evening, even in the moments that passed him by. Robert didn't stop there, couldn't stop there, wouldn't stop there, knowing Samuel's story deserved more, knowing his sacrifice deserved more, knowing a hero deserved more than mockery on a dusty lot, even in the sunlight, even in the lot, even in the years that had kept them apart. He pulled out his phone, his heart heavy with the weight of what he'd seen, with the weight of what he knew he had to do, with the weight of a story that deserved to be told, a story that deserved to be heard, a story that deserved to be honored. Even if no one else saw, even if no one else cared, even if the world kept moving on without them. He called his old Marine buddies, men and women who'd served with him, who'd known the brotherhood of the Corps, who'd answered his call without question, a call for justice, a call for honor, a call for a brother Marine, even in the silence. even in the duty, even in the years that had kept them apart. Ethan froze, his smirk fading as he turned to face Robert, his bravado challenged, his control threatened, his pride wounded, a wound he understood, a wound he felt, a wound he couldn't ignore. But Robert's call had set something in motion, something bigger than Ethan's taunts, something stronger than his arrogance, something that would change the course of that evening in ways no one could have predicted, even in the gas station, even in the evening, even in the moments that passed them by. On that warm Thursday evening, the sound of engines roared through the quiet streets of Pineview, a steady rumble that broke the stillness of the gas station, that stopped Ethan in his tracks as he prepared another taunt, that made his heart pound with unease and confusion, a sound that spoke of something big, something unexpected, a sound that would change everything forever. For Ethan, for Samuel, for the town of Pineview, for the world that would hear their story, that would see their honor, that would remember their sacrifice, their redemption, their humanity in a way that would last, in a way that would matter, in a way that would echo, louder than words, louder than silence, louder than the cruelty that had kept them apart. The crowd turned, their whispers falling silent as a group of U.S. Marines in dress uniforms stepped out of their vehicles, their faces set with purpose, their movements deliberate, their presence a testament to a brotherhood that spanned decades, a brotherhood that had come to right a wrong, a brotherhood that had come for one of their own, even in the sunlight, even in the gas station, even in the years that had kept them apart. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to True Quiet Stories for more untold tales of valor. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.